All right, now here's the last one, the super short summary of China and imperialism in China. All right, well, just to start off here, I just want to say that so at the end of the day, China isn't officially imperialized, but long story short, it is, if that makes sense. All right, so for thousands and thousands of years, China was seen as the world superpower. They invented paper. They invented many more things. They were entirely self-sufficient. So they had all the essentials that they needed to survive. They had food. They had a great social system that didn't have too many issues. They were just totally fine living life on their own. They thought that they were superior. For hundreds of years, people had been coming into China, begging them to trade, saying, "Look what we have! We have hot air balloons, we have clocks, we have harps." All right, and every single time, China was just like, "Nah, sorry, bro, that ain't really cool. We got other cool stuff like fireworks and paper, and we don't really care what you have." And so Europeans mainly were getting pissed off because they saw the huge opportunity that they had in China to make a bunch of money, just like they had in Africa and also in India. All right, so what were they going to do now since China had no interest in anything European whatsoever? We're going to see. All right, so this is a cartoon here, a really racist cartoon too, about when this Lord McCartney was kneeling before the Emperor of China and presenting his gifts, so aka all the cool stuff that Europeans have. So hot air balloons. There's badminton stuff down here. All right, and so they didn't really show him any respect, and they were just like, "Nah, get out of here." And so McCartney and the rest of Europe was still pissed off. They're like, "What can we do to trade with China?" And so, slowly but surely, Great Britain had a plan. They found this drug that allowed them into China. What was going to get the Chinese people coming back to the British for something that the Chinese government didn't have? And that was opium. Opium's an extremely addictive drug. It's used modern day in heroin and morphine, and it caused the same drug addiction problems that it causes today. So people would lose their jobs. People would, um, their families would be torn apart because of drug addiction. All right. And so what happened? How did the British get this drug into China? There was one city that was allowed to trade with the outside world, and opium was able to be grown in India, the crown jewel of the British Empire. So they grew opium, which is just right next to China. They brought it over into the port and they snuck it into the country. They got millions of people hooked on this opium, and there ended up being a war over this. All right. Um, this started causing problems, both because of the foreign influence that starts growing, the foreign reliance on other countries, but also started pissing the Chinese people off at the Chinese government because they couldn't do anything to stop this opium addiction. So you're going to see two main rebellions, the Taiping Rebellion and the Boxer Rebellion. All right. One was about death to the foreign devils. They see the Europeans as these foreign devils. Um, and so this kind of caused the Chinese people to grow a sense of nationalism or pride in their country. But then this also got cut off here. They also kind of realized that they needed to industrialize a little bit. And the reason they saw this was this opium war. All right. This is when the Chinese declared war on the British because of the British getting a bunch of Chinese people addicted to opium. And uh, long story short, the British handed the Chinese a very humiliating defeat because for thousands of years, again, China had been the world's #1 power. Now, with Britain's modern cannons and weaponry, they were able to easily defeat the Chinese, who some people thought were living in the past. And so, for both of these rebellions here, both against the Chinese government and against these foreign devils, they needed foreigners to put it down, to stop the rebellion. And so, with every single act that foreigners did for the Chinese government, they kept getting their foot in the door a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And so, I'm sure that you guys can see where this is going. And now these weren't just tiny little rebellions, these were massive rebellions. Just to put it into perspective, the Taiping Rebellion lasted 20 years and over 20 million people died throughout this rebellion. Just to put this into perspective, the American Civil War, only 650,000 people died. So 650,000 people in the American Civil War versus 20 million in the Taiping Rebellion. These were massive rebellions that needed foreign powers to help put this down because they had the superior weaponry. And now China was kind of seen as the golden egg. All right, so everyone wanted kind of a piece of China because of how valuable China was seen as. They could make a lot of money off of it. And so by this time, the U.S. Was a little bit more established, and they were kind of seen as a world power. And the U.S. saw how the imperialism of Africa went, and they're like, "Hey, we're not about that life. All right, we want this to look something. Well, we want this to look a little bit different." And so what the U.S. did was they ensured that all Western powers had access to China, just not one country. All right, and so maybe the U.S. would trade in this city, the French would trade in another city, the British would trade in another city, and so on. And so by the end of this, all these Western powers that wanted access to China to trade with them in whatever they wanted to do, they had that opportunity, but it wasn't China wasn't technically imperialized because they still had their emperor and they were still had um, the emperor ruling their society. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know. So in summary here, the Europeans wanted to trade with China, but China had no interest. They're like, no, bro, you don't have anything cool. We have everything we need. This leads to the British illegally selling opium. They were sneaking it into the country after they grew it in India, got a bunch of people addicted to it. All right, this leads to wars where the Chinese lose because they have less advanced weapons. This leads to Europeans dominating China, not officially, but they were able to dominate it. All right, and leads to more revolts and humiliation for China. And so by the end of the day, everyone had access to trading. That's it for that.